My husband had a secret family for 7 years, and now my mother is blaming me for it. Yes, you read that right. As if discovering my husband's betrayal wasn't bad enough, I now have to deal with my own mother telling me that this whole mess is somehow my fault. How did my life get to this point? Buckle up, because this story is a roller coaster of lies, family drama, and betrayal that goes deeper than I could have ever imagined. Let's start from the beginning. I met Jake about 9 years ago. At first, everything was perfect. He was charming, attentive, and incredibly thoughtful. He wasn't just the guy who opened doors for me or remembered my favorite kind of wine. He was the guy who would surprise me with weekend getaways or show up at work with lunch just because he wanted to see me smile. He seemed too good to be true. My friends would often joke that I had hit the jackpot with Jake. I remember feeling like the luckiest person alive. I couldn't believe someone like him wanted to build a life with someone like me. 1 year into dating, Jake proposed, and we had the wedding of my dreams. Everything about that day felt like a fairy tale. The flowers, the ceremony, the reception. I had found the love of my life. We settled into married life smoothly, or so I thought. We had 2 kids together, Lily, who is now 5, and Max, who is 3. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect family. Jake had a solid job as a regional manager for a big company, which required him to travel often. His frequent absences were something I didn't love, but I trusted him completely. He was traveling for work, and that was what was necessary to provide us with a good life, or so he told me. Whenever I felt a little lonely during his trips, I'd remind myself that he was out there working hard for our family's future. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer so I could be there for the kids while also contributing financially. Life was busy, but I enjoyed being a mom, and even though Jake wasn't always around, I felt like I was managing things just fine. Sure, I wished he could be home more, but I was proud of the family we had built together. Looking back now, I realized there were signs that something wasn't quite right. I just didn't see them. Or maybe I didn't want to see them. Jake's trips seemed to be getting longer. He always had an explanation. The client needed me for an extra day. Or, there's a big project I'm managing and they need me on site. At first, I believed him without question. Why wouldn't I? He had never given me any reason to doubt him before. Then, about a year ago, things started to feel different. Jake's absences became more frequent, and even when he was home, he seemed distant. He'd spend long hours on his phone or laptop, always claiming it was for work. I remember one particular trip when he was supposed to be gone for 3 days, but it got extended to 5. When I asked him why, he brushed it off, saying the client needed more time. I didn't think too much of it at the time. His job was demanding, and he had always been dedicated to his work. But the more it happened, the more uneasy I started to feel. There was a tension building in our relationship, but I couldn't quite figure out why. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always dismissed my concerns, saying I was overthinking things. And then I found the credit card statement, and it was completely by accident. Jake had left some papers on his desk, and while tidying up, I noticed the statement for a credit card I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a company card or something work-related, but as I looked more closely, I saw the charges: expensive dinners, hotel stays, and shopping at luxury stores. My heart sank as I realized these weren't work-related expenses. I confronted Jake as soon as he returned from his trip. I asked him about the card and the charges. At first, he seemed caught off guard, but then he quickly shifted into damage control mode. "It's a work card," he said, brushing off my concerns. "I didn't tell you because it's just business expenses. You don't need to worry about it." His explanation didn't sit right with me, but I wanted to believe him. After all, we had been together for so long, and I had never had a reason to doubt him. I pushed the uneasy feeling to the back of my mind, telling myself I was being paranoid. Jake had always been good to me, good to our kids. He couldn't possibly be hiding anything, right? But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. Over the next few months, I noticed more strange behavior. Jake would get defensive when I asked about his trips, and he seemed to be spending more time than ever on his phone. There were moments when I'd catch him quickly closing out of a text conversation or changing the subject when I asked who he was talking to. Still, I told myself I was just being insecure. I didn't want to be the kind of person who snooped or made baseless accusations. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Everything came crashing down one Friday afternoon about 3 months ago. I was home with the kids when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something told me I should. On the other end was a woman's voice, and she sounded nervous. "Is this Jessica?" she asked. "Yes, who's this?" I replied, my heart already starting to race. "My name is Rachel," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I think we need to talk. It's about Jake." My stomach dropped. "What about Jake?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I'm his wife. I'm his wife." Those 3 words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't process what she was saying. My mind couldn't grasp the reality of what was happening. I was his wife. What did she mean? "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. Rachel hesitated, and in that moment of silence I felt my entire world shift. "I didn't know," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know about you." I was still in shock, unable to respond. My throat was tight and my mind raced. I couldn't make sense of anything she was saying. How could this woman claim to be Jake's wife when I was married to him? How could she not know about me, about our family? "I've been married to Jake for almost 7 years, Rachel continued, her words coming out more like a confession than an explanation. "We have a son together." 7 years, the exact same amount of time I had been married to Jake. How was that possible? My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. My hands were shaking, and I could barely hold onto the phone. "I had no idea," I finally whispered, struggling to find my voice. "I didn't know." We were both silent for a while, both too stunned to speak. I didn't know how to respond. I couldn't comprehend what this meant. Jake had another wife? Another family? For 7 years? "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice weak. "Just a few days," Rachel replied. "I found out by accident. Jake had left his phone out and I saw a message from you. That's how I knew something wasn't right." I confronted him, and he admitted everything. I felt sick. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something, but I was frozen in place. How could this be real? The man I had loved, trusted, built a life with. He had been lying to me this entire time? How could I not have known? "I don't know what to say," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I had no idea. He's been lying to me too." Rachel's voice softened. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt you, but I thought you should know." I thanked her, though I don't even remember how the conversation ended. My mind was in a fog. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, the weight of what I had just learned crushing me. Jake had been living a double life for 7 years, splitting his time between me and another family, another woman, another child. All of those trips, all of those late nights he claimed to be working, it had all been a lie. I don't know how long I sat there, staring blankly at the wall. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, had been ripped away in a single phone call. I felt like I was floating, detached from reality as the truth slowly began to sink in. When Jake came home that night, I was waiting for him. My heart was pounding in my chest and my hands were still trembling from the shock of what I had learned. I didn't know how I was going to confront him, but I knew I had to. He walked through the door, smiling like everything was normal, like he hadn't been leading a double life for nearly a decade. "Hey, how's everything?" he asked casually, dropping his bag by the door. I stared at him, feeling a rush of anger boil up inside me. "I know, Jake." His smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I know about Rachel. I know about your other family." Jake's face went pale. For a moment, he didn't say anything, He just stood there, frozen, staring at me. I saw the panic in his eyes, the fear of being caught. He didn't even try to deny it. "Jess, he started, but I cut him off. "How could you do this to me? To our children? You've been lying to me for 7 years, Jake, 7 years." "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to get this far." "Get this far?" I shouted, my anger exploding. "You have another family, Jake, a wife, a child. How long did you think you could keep this from me? From us?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I didn't think it would turn out like this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His excuses, his weak apologies meant nothing to me. I had trusted him, loved him, built a life with him, and all the while he had been living a lie. How could he do this to me? How could he do this to our children? "I need you to leave," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Now." "Jess, please let me explain." "No," I snapped. "I don't want to hear any more lies. You need to leave. I can't even look at you right now." Jake hesitated, looking like he wanted to say something more, but I turned away from him. I couldn't bear to look at his face. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger I didn't recognize. Without another word, Jake left the house. As soon as the door closed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. My whole life had been shattered in the span of a few hours, and I didn't know how I was going to pick up the pieces. I cried until I had no more tears left. It felt like I had been sucker punched by life itself. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just the lies, though they were devastating enough. It was the sense that my entire reality had been ripped away, that everything I had believed about my life, my family, and my marriage had been built on a foundation of deceit. I had spent the better part of a decade with this man. We'd built a family together. We had children. We had dreams for the future. And now all of that felt like a cruel joke. The man I thought I knew didn't exist. In his place was a liar who had been living a double life, choosing to betray not only me but also our children. I couldn't stop thinking about Lily and Max. How would I ever explain this to them? How could I make them understand that their father had chosen to build 2 lives, that he had been hiding something so fundamental from all of us? After hours of sitting in silence, the reality of the situation started to settle in. Jake was gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. I could never trust him again. The life we had built was over, and I had no idea what to do next. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to speak to anyone, not even my closest friends. I shut myself off from the world, focusing only on the kids and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for them. But inside, I was a mess. I felt hollow. It was as though my soul had been ripped out, leaving only an empty shell. Lily noticed, of course. She was old enough to sense that something was wrong, even though I hadn't told her the full story. She would ask me, "Mommy, where's Daddy? When is he coming home?" Each time she asked, it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I didn't know how to tell her the truth, and I didn't know when I'd be ready to. I told her that Daddy was staying somewhere else for a while because of work. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Every time I told her that, I hated myself a little more. Max, being younger, didn't ask as many questions, but he had been acting out more than usual, throwing tantrums, refusing to sleep, clinging to me whenever I left the room. He could feel the tension in the house, even if he didn't understand what was causing it. I felt guilty for not being able to protect him from it. And then there was my mother. I hadn't told her what had happened, though I knew it was only a matter of time before she found out. We had always had a complicated relationship, and I wasn't sure I could handle her judgment right now, but she found out anyway, as mothers always do. One evening she called me, and I could tell immediately from her tone that she knew something was wrong. "Jessica," she said, her voice full of concern. "What's going on with you and Jake?" I haven't seen him around, and I know something's not right." I hesitated, but I knew I couldn't keep it from her forever. So I told her the truth. I told her about Jake's other wife, about the phone call from Rachel, about the years of deception. I expected her to be as shocked as I had been, to be horrified by Jake's actions, but instead her response floored me. "Well, Jessica," she said in that familiar disapproving tone, "men don't just do these things for no reason. You must not have been doing enough to keep him happy. Maybe if you had been more attentive or kept the house in better shape, he wouldn't have strayed." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything Jake had done, after the lies and the betrayal, my own mother was blaming me. It was as though she had turned the knife that was already in my back. "How can you say that?" I choked out, tears threatening to spill again. "This is Jake's fault. He's the one who lied. He's the one who cheated. How is any of this my fault?" "Men have needs, Jessica," she said, as if that explained everything. "If a woman doesn't take care of her man, he'll look elsewhere. It's just how things are." Her words cut deep. I had always struggled with my mother's traditional views on relationships, but I never expected her to side with Jake after everything he had done. I felt utterly abandoned. Not only had my husband betrayed me, but now my mother, the one person who should have supported me, was telling me that I was to blame for his infidelity. I ended the conversation as quickly as I could, not wanting to hear any more of her judgment. But her words stayed with me, gnawing at my already fragile sense of self-worth. Was she right? Had I failed as a wife? Could I have done something to prevent Jake from looking elsewhere? I hated that her words made me doubt myself, but they did. They lingered in my mind, mixing with the anger and heartbreak I was already feeling. I knew deep down that none of this was my fault. Jake's actions were his own, and nothing I had done, or hadn't done, justified his betrayal. But that didn't make it hurt any less. In the meantime, Jake had been texting me, begging for forgiveness, asking for a chance to explain. He said he wanted to fix things, that he still loved me and the kids, that he had made a mistake and wanted to make it right. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I even begin to have a conversation with him when every word he had ever said to me now felt like a lie? I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know how to rebuild my life after something like this. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. There was no repairing the damage Jake had done. He had destroyed everything, and I couldn't trust him again. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on the kids and my work, anything to keep my mind off of the mess Jake had left behind. Every time my phone buzzed with another text from him, my stomach would churn. I couldn't bring myself to delete his messages, but I couldn't respond either. They all said the same thing. "I'm sorry. Please let me explain." What was there to explain? He had built 2 families, lived 2 lives, and lied to all of us. What explanation could possibly make this better? I tried to pretend everything was normal for the kids. I kept the same routine, getting them up for school, making breakfast, helping them with homework. But I could feel the cracks in my facade. Lily especially sensed something was off. She was old enough to understand that Daddy wasn't around and that something about his absence wasn't temporary. Every time she asked me when he was coming home, my heart broke a little more. I still hadn't told her the truth. I didn't know how to explain something so complicated to a 5-year-old. One day, as we were sitting at the dinner table, Lily looked at me with her big, questioning eyes. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy come home anymore? Is he mad at me?" That was it. That was the moment that shattered the last bit of composure I had left. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I tried to speak, to reassure her, but the words stuck in my throat. How could she think this was her fault? How could any of this be her fault? "No, sweetheart," I finally managed to choke out. "Daddy's not mad at you. This has nothing to do with you." Lily looked down at her plate, still confused. "Then why doesn't he come back?" I wiped my tears, trying to compose myself. Daddy made a mistake," I said softly. "He's not going to be living with us for a while, but it's not your fault, okay? He loves you very much." Lily didn't say anything else. She just nodded quietly, though I could tell she still didn't fully understand. How could she? None of this made sense, even to me. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone. Jake had sent another text. "Please, Jess, can we talk? I want to explain." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether I should finally respond. A part of me wanted to hear what he had to say, to confront him and demand answers. But another part of me was terrified of what more he might reveal. I wasn't sure I could handle any more lies, any more betrayals. Eventually, I gave in. I typed out a short, simple response. "Come by tomorrow morning. We need to talk." The next morning, Jake showed up at the house looking disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had dark circles under them. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I'm so sorry, Jess," he said the moment he walked through the door. "I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to fix it." I stood there, arms crossed, not saying anything. I let him speak, let him spill his rehearsed apologies and excuses. He told me how things with Rachel had started before we got married, how he had tried to end it but hadn't been able to. He said he loved both of us and didn't know how to choose. He claimed he had never wanted things to get this far. "It just got out of control," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I shook my head, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I repeated, incredulous. "Jake, you've been living two lives for 7 years. You've been lying to me, to Rachel, to both of your families. This isn't some mistake you made once. This is a choice you've made every day for almost a decade." He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "I know," he whispered. "I know I've messed everything up, but I still love you, Jess. I love the kids. I want to make things right." I laughed bitterly. "How, Jake? How do you make this right? You've destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, our future. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was." "I know it won't be easy," he said, his voice desperate. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go to counseling. I'll do anything you need. Please, just give me a chance." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes again. "I don't think I can do that," I said quietly. "I don't think I can ever trust you again." Jake's face crumpled, and for the first time I saw real regret in his eyes. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and no amount of regret could undo it. After a long, painful silence, Jake finally stood up. "I understand," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I really am." Without another word, he left the house. I watched him walk away, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was the end. The end of our marriage. The end of the life we had built together. But in some ways, it was also the beginning. The beginning of my healing, my moving on. And in the weeks that followed, I tried to put the pieces of my life back together. I focused on the kids, on being there for them. Lily still asked about Jake from time to time, and each time I gave her the same answer. "Daddy loves you very much. He just can't live with us right now." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the best I could do. My mother, predictably, continued to blame me. "If you'd been a better wife," she said during one of our conversations, "maybe this wouldn't have happened." I no longer had the energy to argue with her. I knew now that Jake's betrayal had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with how good or bad of a wife I had been. It had everything to do with his own selfishness, his inability to take responsibility for his actions. I wasn't sure what the future held for me or for the kids, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never let someone like Jake into my life again. I deserved better, and so did my children.